Tonight at 10, no government bailout for struggling energy firms, but ministers say that power supplies are secure. A massive rise in the wholesale cost of gas paid by suppliers brings fears of a winter crisis, but ministers offer reassurance.
There is absolutely no question, Mr. Speaker, of the lights going out or people being unable to heat their homes.
And in supermarkets, it's feared that the rise in gas prices will cause a shortage of CO2, which is vital for food and drinks production. We'll be asking if more price rises for the consumer are the inevitable consequence of the crisis. Also tonight, a sudden change of policy as America says it will lift the ban on British and EU travellers in November. The Ministry of Defence is to launch an investigation. It's accused of compromising the safety of more than 250 Afghan interpreters. And the latest from the Canary Islands, where a volcanic eruption on La Palma has driven thousands from their homes.
And coming up in the sport on the BBC News channel. No more cricket tour. England withdraw from their tour to Pakistan next month, citing mental well-being as one of the driving factors.
Good evening. There will be no bailout by the taxpayer for struggling energy firms, according to the Business Secretary, who's been holding talks with industry leaders today. Kwasi Kwarteng said that customers would be protected if more energy companies went out of business, and he said there was no prospect of an energy supply emergency this winter. The growing crisis has been caused by a massive rise in the wholesale prices paid by the energy companies. The food and drinks industry is also warning that one of the knock-on effects of the situation will be more shortages in the shops. Our business editor Simon Jack has more details.
The UK energy sector is in crisis. Dozens of small energy providers have already gone bust, and dozens more are not expected to make it through winter, as soaring energy prices leave many unable to deliver on price promises made to millions of customers who are encouraged to look for the best deals.
Secretary of State.
In the Commons today, the Business Secretary sought to reassure customers ahead of winter.
We have sufficient capacity and more than sufficient capacity to meet demand, and we do not expect supply emergencies to occur this winter. There is absolutely no question, Mr. Speaker, of the lights going out or people being unable to heat their homes.
He also announced a government-imposed price cap would be maintained, but that's one of the things creating problems for providers, as the wholesale cost of gas is miles higher than the retail cap.
You can see here exactly what has happened to wholesale gas prices. They have more than tripled since the beginning of the year, rising 70% in August alone. That's the what. Why? Some global issues. There's been a surge in demand for energy as the world economy awakes from the COVID-19 deep freeze. International stockpiles are unusually low for this time of year. And Russia has been accused of withholding supplies to pressurise EU governments to approve a new pipeline into Europe, but some UK-specific ones too. We've had outages at ageing nuclear plants. We've had maintenance on some North Sea gas platforms. We had a fire knocking out a pipeline that brings in energy from Europe. And the wind hasn't been blowing, which means wind turbines are generating less, which means gas-fired power stations have to produce more.
Many new smaller companies set up offering cheap deals, but unlike the bigger players, many didn't insure themselves against a price spike of this magnitude, leaving some of them now with bleak prospects.
In the current market, as it is, we're not going to see it through the winter. If it gets worse, then that timescale gets shortened. I think ourselves, along with a lot of other small energy suppliers out there, need direct government intervention to be able to see it through the coming months.
But the government said it will not bail out failing companies, but it will need to find a way to compensate the surviving firms for taking on millions of loss-making accounts. But what should you do if your supplier goes bust?
There's a tried and tested safety net which protects customers and will move you to another supplier. That will be done automatically. There's nothing that you need to do yourself. So actually our best advice is to sit tight. It may take a few weeks for that to happen. We do advise people to take a meter reading, or even better, to take a photograph of your meter.
Some big energy bosses have described this crisis as a failure of regulation. New companies offered cheap deals to grab a share of the market with no plan in place if the cost of supplying energy rose above the amount they were allowed to charge. Later this year, the UK will host a key climate change summit. This crisis is also a reminder of just how exposed the UK energy system remains to the price of gas. Simon Jack, BBC News.
The energy crisis is already having an impact on supermarket chains and their customers. The rise in gas prices has caused a shortage of carbon dioxide, which is essential to many food and drink production methods. And the industry is calling on the government to intervene to protect supplies of meat and fresh produce. Our business correspondent, Emma Simpson, has more details.
This pig farm in East Yorkshire sends more than 1,500 animals a week to an abattoir for slaughter. They're stunned with carbon dioxide, but if that runs out, the pigs can't leave and the backlog will have to be dealt with.
If government don't step in and sort this massive problem out, then basically these pigs here in this shed will have to be culled on farm and they'll go into landfill, and that to me is criminal.
Here's the issue. Most of the UK's CO2 comes as a byproduct from 2 fertiliser plants in Cheshire and on Teesside. They've shut down because gas prices are so high, it's uneconomic. At the UK's biggest chicken supplier, they use CO2 in packaging to prolong shelf life and to stun the birds before processing. But the gas tanks will soon be empty.
We are at a crisis point. We've got 4 to 5 days left and we'll have to reduce our production by 10%.
How many chickens is that?
Well, that's over 500,000 chickens a week.
How long has the government got to try to solve this then?
You've only got days and hours. The thing here is the government need to intervene, get these plants up and running and save Christmas and actually save the food supply chain.
It's not just pork and poultry. CO2 is used everywhere in food manufacturing to keep stuff fresh for longer. For instance, ready-made pizzas, bags of cheese. It's in bags of salad, ready meals. Here's a naan bread. And of course it puts the fizz into fizzy drinks. Without it, there'll be shortages and food waste. It takes a lot of natural gas and CO2 to grow some of our fresh produce too, like these cucumbers under cover. Growers may have to shorten the planting season now the costs are so high.
Growers are telling us that if the energy market doesn't stabilise or government do not provide some sort of help for the growing sector, that we may have to see an early finish to the UK season and a late start next year and replace this with imports.
The government insists food won't run out. The industry is resilient, but the pressure's now on for ministers to find a solution to minimise further disruption to the food supply chain. Emma Simpson, BBC News.
And there's more information for you on what this could mean for household bills and finances. Have a look at BBC News online, bbc.co.uk/news, and you'll see the links there to the relevant sections. The day's other main story now, and in a sudden change of policy by President Biden, vaccinated passengers will be able to enter the US from the United Kingdom and the European Union from November. The decision will end 20 months of travel restrictions brought in by President Trump. The changes only apply to those travellers who have received 2 doses of a COVID vaccine, and the sudden change is being seen as something of a diplomatic achievement for Brussels and for London, and comes as Boris Johnson arrived in New York to meet fellow world leaders. We'll have more on that visit by Mr Johnson shortly with our political editor Laura Kuensberg, who's in New York. But first, let's turn to our North America editor John Sopel in Washington to talk about those travel changes. What led to this, John?
Huw, I think it came out of the blue for Downing Street and actually out of the blue for an awful lot of people in the White House. I think the expectation was any decision on this was still weeks away. What seems to have changed Joe Biden's mind is the growing restlessness and discontent among European leaders at a time when Boris Johnson is going to be in Washington tomorrow and other European leaders are going to be meeting Joe Biden at the United Nations General Assembly over Afghanistan. The French are furious over that submarine Green Deal, and all of that came to a head. And just a sign of how rushed the decision was is a conversation we've had with a White House official who said, when we asked, well, what happens to people with AstraZeneca vaccines? What happens to 12 and 18-year-olds with only one jab? The reply was, well, that's a granular detail we haven't worked out yet. Granular? That will affect millions of people. On the other hand, the British are confident they will get agreement on this issue. What clearly has happened today is that it is great news for the tourism industry, great news for tourists, but most particularly for all those people who've got loved ones in America who they have not been able to see since the travel ban was introduced last March.
John, many thanks again. John Sopel there in Washington with the latest on those travel changes. Well, as the travel announcement was being made at the White House, Boris Johnson was in New York to attend a meeting of the United Nations. He's urging fellow leaders to sign up to a financial and environmental set of targets ahead of November's climate change conference, which is called COP26, which takes place in Glasgow. Now, as we mentioned, Laura Kinsberg, our political editor, is in New York. Laura, what's at stake here?
Well, Huw, it's a busy old day in New York, and there's been a lot at stake here for Boris Johnson. He's met a whole gaggle of international leaders today, but tomorrow all eyes will be on his one-to-one with Joe Biden, their first chance to eyeball each other in the White House. And his message to Joe Biden, as he's told us tonight, will be that the relationship is as good as it has been for decades between our two countries. But there are still tensions, of course, over Afghanistan and the pullout of troops from Kabul. But also the UK has been pushing America to give stronger promises on climate change, an echo of the message that Boris Johnson has been delivering at the United Nations today. And our report from just a few blocks away starts with some flashing images.
An emergency unfolding, the point the Prime Minister travelled to New York to make. The United Nations meeting here is not united in how to slow down changes to the planet, how much to spend, how much carbon to save.
We are close to the moment to start. Yeah.
Boris Johnson's mission to try to push other countries into line.
Everybody always agrees that something must be done.
Saying something isn't enough for him. It's only chance that's put the UK in charge of trying to get global agreement this autumn. So success or failure is about political ambition as well as the planet.
We have to grow up and take our responsibilities. I think we go through, a period of glorious indifference about the world. We've been through that. We've been through our childhood, if you like. We now got to realise that this is a problem that requires grip.
The official international machine urges progress.
Our world is challenged like never before. From climate change to conflicts to COVID-19, it would be easy to lose hope. But we are not hopeless.
Yet what hope is there really when vast countries like China, India, huge emitters of carbon, aren't quite so keen?
Strangely, this meeting really matters to Downing Street because of the next big international shindig at home, the climate conference in Glasgow at the beginning of November. The Prime Minister wants all countries, big and small, wealthy and less so, to make more dramatic promises to cut their carbon, and for the richer ones to put their hands in their pockets to help the others go green. Right now, he only puts the chances of that happening in time at 6 out of 10. So there's a real demand for Boris Johnson to create momentum here in Manhattan.
But whose mind can he change? The outspoken Brazilian leader who's let the Amazon forest burn? Boris Johnson had vowed to tell Jair Bolsonaro to stop what's going on. But when they actually met, it looked rather friendlier than that. The Prime Minister urging the Brazilian to get the AstraZeneca vaccine.
Get AstraZeneca vaccine.
That appeared to have fallen on deaf ears. But every country here this week has its own political climate, every country its own interests too. The American president, on his way to New York tonight, will tomorrow reveal more of his own. Laura Kunzberg, BBC News, New York.
To Afghanistan now, where fears are growing that the country will be overwhelmed by a humanitarian crisis. The United Nations says that after decades of war, the people of the country face perhaps their most perilous moment. The UN World Food Programme says only 7% of Afghans have enough to eat. The BBC's Jeremy Bowen is in Kabul and he sent this report on the conditions there.
The struggle to live, to eat, to survive did not end when the shooting stopped. At first light, hundreds of building workers looking for a day's employment gather at a marketplace in the centre of Kabul. With their tools and without much hope. Afghanistan's economy is closing down. Millions live in poverty in a country that has received huge sums in foreign aid. These men rage about the fortune stolen by a corrupt elite in the last 20 years. Food prices are rocketing. Millions barely feed their families. Hunger could become the worst of Afghanistan's many crises. $9 billion that might help them was frozen by the Americans to keep it away from the Taliban.
In the name of Allah, we call on America government that they must give the money in the budget that they have deducted from Afghanistan. They must recognize our new government, Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan.
Malnutrition is a chronic problem in Afghanistan. Only patients with other severe complications, like 3-year-old Mohammed, have a chance of a bed at Kabul Children's Hospital. But more patients are arriving. The doctors said that was because the World Bank stopped funding village clinics after the Taliban victory. Life was never easy in Afghanistan. 7-month-old Mohammed Abbas is his mother's 4th living child. 6 others died at birth. Like all the other women in the corridor, she wanted to hide her identity. Not a new thing in Afghanistan, but under the Taliban, everyone is more cautious. Taliban fighters are highly visible in Kabul. Some here say security is much better now the fighting is over. For many, it's quiet, built on fear.
Countries that want to help Afghans but detest the Taliban and all that they stand for are in a bind. For people to earn money, to buy food, to look after their families, the Taliban needs to preside over a viable state. Now, for the Americans, the British, and all the other countries that fought the Taliban for so many years, that might be just too much, especially if the Taliban can then claim another victory.
A community high above the city carries the scars of 40 years of war. So do the families who live here. This family is leaving for Pakistan. The mother, the only breadwinner, taught male students. The Taliban stopped her job and her younger daughter's education. They've sold their possessions. Leaving is still hard.
با وطنم جیگرم با وطنم خونه است که من چطور وطن خدا الا بکنم ولی افسوس مجبور هستم که خودم باشم امکان نداره که ما را وظیفه ببانن و نفقه روزگار خدا چطور کنم اولادای خدا از چی نان بودم.
Their dreams were always fragile in a state riddled with corruption which couldn't survive the departure of its foreign backers. Afghanistan's newest crisis is about fundamentals of life. Food, security and hope, and the despair and anger when they've gone. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News, Kabul.
A story that's developing this evening. The Ministry of Defence has been accused of compromising the safety of Afghan interpreters because of a serious data breach. More than 250 people who are seeking relocation to the UK were mistakenly copied into an email asking for an update on their situation. Our special correspondent Lucy Manning has uncovered the story, and Lucy joins us now. What have you learned, Lucy?
Well, the Defence Secretary tonight has launched an urgent investigation into what he's calling this unacceptable breach. It comes after BBC News discovered that the email addresses containing names and photos of some of the interpreters and other workers who'd worked for the British had been circulated wrongly in an email, and obviously there's concerns that that email might get into the wrong hands. What happened was the relocation team based at the MOD in London emailed those interpreters and workers who haven't made it to the UK, who are either hiding in Afghanistan or in third countries, to get an update from them. And one interpreter realised that there were 250 other email addresses, names and photos on that email. And one interpreter said this mistake could cost the lives of interpreters, especially for those still in Afghanistan. The MOD tonight has apologised. It has launched an investigation, but it's another misstep in this evacuation of interpreters from Afghanistan.
Lucy, many thanks again. Lucy Manning, our special correspondent, who's uncovered that story there. Let's have a look then at the latest official data on the pandemic in the UK, and they show that there were 36,100 new infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period. And that means in the past week an average of 30,378 new cases per day. The latest figure showed 7,847 people with COVID are being treated in hospitals in the UK. Another 49 deaths have been recorded of people who died within 28 days of a positive COVID test. And the average number of deaths per day in the last week is now 142. On vaccinations, 89.4% of people aged 16 or over have had their first jab, while 81.8% are now double vaccinated. Police in Derbyshire have arrested a man as part of a murder investigation after 4 people were found dead at a house in Killamarsh near Sheffield yesterday. 2 children were found dead at the house, along with their mother and another child. Our correspondent Danny Savage has this report.
It was early yesterday morning when police were called to this semi-detached house in Killamarsh. They discovered the bodies of 3 children and a woman. Today, 13-year-old John Bennett and his 11-year-old sister Lacey were named as 2 of the victims. They are pictured here with their dad, Jason.
I just don't know how he's going to even come through this.
I don't.
His parents visited the scene today and stopped to talk to reporters. They are devastated at the loss of their grandchildren and are supporting their son.
They're the most well-mannered children you'd ever meet.
Yeah.
As kids nowadays, they were well-mannered, they always remembered the manners, they always please and thank you. If you ever brought them a present, the first thing they did was go on Facebook and thank you. I don't know how we're going to manage without them.
No.
Jason Bennett said on Facebook, "Absolutely broken my heart into a million pieces. My beautiful boy John and beautiful daughter Lacey have been taken away from me. Their mum Terry also lost her life. Life will never be the same." Terry Harris, the children's mother, was 35 years old. The third child who died was 11-year-old Connie Gent from Sheffield. She was Lacey's friend, staying here on a sleepover. A 31-year-old man arrested yesterday remains in police custody as specialist officers continue their investigations. Danny Savage, BBC News, Killamarsh near Sheffield.
The voters of Germany go to the polls this weekend to elect their next government and choose a replacement for Angela Merkel as Chancellor. During her 16 years in power, Angela Merkel has played a powerful and very prominent role on the world stage. Our Europe editor Katja Adler asks what kind of leadership Germans want after the Merkel era.
Come meet Generation Merkel. They've known no other Prime Minister their whole young lives.
She has kept it in this safe space like a mom would for the past 16 years, but it's now time for a change.
Their wish list for Germany's new era after Sunday's election is long.
I care most about the climate problems we have right now in Germany.
I care most about education and the economy after the next election.
And I really care about gender equality.
Germany is really behind when it comes to digitalization, so we're far behind that in comparison to other countries.
Germany lagging behind? That might surprise you. This is more its image abroad. Modern, efficient, high-tech. But Merkel governments were criticised for failing to invest in Germany's future, its infrastructure, road and rail. 1 in 3 German villages has poor connectivity, a problem for families and businesses during the pandemic, a priority issue in Sunday's election.
Especially with COVID, when we had to study through the phone, and it always stopped and you got kicked out and then had to ask again and again what the teacher was talking about.
When other countries look at Germany, they also see what they want to see. The reality is different.
People won't be able to live where they like to live, like at the village or in villages. They would have to move to the larger towns because there is a better connection.
German politics can sometimes be dismissed as staid, even predictable. But with Angela Merkel's departure after 16 years as Chancellor, this is a time of change, and that has an impact at home and abroad. Germany is, of course, the EU's richest and most powerful nation, so these elections are being watched not just in Brussels, but in Beijing, in Washington and the UK.
Germany most likely will continue to be the single most politically stable element in the European Union and the single biggest economic power in the European Union. That's why Germany is going to remain important and probably grow in importance for our global and international partners.
Top candidates to replace Angela Merkel have been very low-key in their election campaigns, but don't let that mislead you. In the current climate of fast-changing global politics, what happens in Germany matters. Katja Adler, BBC News, Frankfurt.
On the Spanish island of La Palma, part of the Canary Islands, thousands of people have been moved from their homes and 100 homes have been destroyed after a volcano erupted yesterday. It's the first time in a half-century that the Cumbre Vieja volcano last erupted. Our correspondent Dan Johnson is on La Palma, joins us now with the latest.
Yes, Huw, the police have got a real challenge here tonight, trying to keep people back, trying to keep them safe, because the lava keeps flowing. No one can stop it, no one can determine where it goes. And it is a spectacular display, but it's a destructive display. This is nature's full force unleashed. It is thunderous to hear, and it is powerful and destructive. And what everyone's trying to work out is where will the lava flow in the next few days, and how much will it take with it? Homes that once enjoyed views of this island's impressive volcanic landscape are now being smothered under it. The relentless downhill creep of molten lava burns its way through anything it touches. The eruption follows a week of tremors, but nobody's seen anything like this on La Palma for half a century.
Mira, mira, mira cómo cae.
Look, it's falling, the man says. Another house destroyed. That's more than 100 now, either burned or buried.
Ahí hay 8 metros, de lava.
8 meters of lava, he says.
Lo más importante es garantizar la seguridad.
Right now, the most important thing is to guarantee security. We are still in the eruption phase. Please, let's be extremely careful.
So residents of 4 villages have been ordered to safety, and some tourists have decided to go home.
I'm worried, or I'm sorry for all the people that are losing or already have lost their houses.
We have no good feeling now on this island, and therefore we want to leave so fast as possible.
This is a disaster movie in slow motion. The lava keeps crawling towards the sea. Spain's tourism minister sees an opportunity, a chance to entice tourists back to view the eruption from a safe distance, because nobody knows how long this will last. Dan Johnson, BBC News, La Palma.
That's it from us now, BBC One. It's time for the news where you are. Have a good night.